Coming up next on the Holistic Wealth Podcast.
So is there discrimination and bullying or harassment happening? Do you have strong policies that address it? Do you then enforce those strong policies in a way that people feel received? I think the mistake that people make is we need to remember that work is work and that work can have a ton of meaning and that people should do meaningful work. But work should never replace who you are or substitute who you are. And so having a healed relationship with work can help really create an environment where you feel connected, but in the right ways.
You're listening to the Holistic Wealth Podcast with host Keisha Blair, author of Holistic Wealth and founder of the Institute on Holistic Wealth. And now, here's your host, Keisha Blair.
Today, we have a very special guest with us. We have Kelley Bonner, and Kelley is a licensed therapist with 15 years experience. She's a burnout expert and a corporate wellness trainer. Her career has been vast. She started her career in the prison system and was one of the youngest women to work in the largest men's maximum security prison in New York State. Her job there was to run a mental health program. She's worked with military sexual trauma victims and has run sexual violence prevention and response offices. She currently is the creator of Burn Bright, a company dedicated to helping creative, big-hearted, helping professionals battle burnout. It's a labor of love, and the way she takes care of the people around her outside of her professional life. Kelley, welcome to the show. It's so great having you here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to start by asking you, Kelley, what was the impetus for your journey in terms of Black Girl Burnout?
What made me really passionate about talking about Black women and burnout is the fact that I had no shock here. I had my own, what I call spectacular burnout, occur in my first professional job. And what I tell people all the time is that the thing about burnout is burnout, among many things, takes away your ability to do the thing that you love. And so for me, what happened is I started a job professionally. I got the dream job, which for some people would never have been a dream job, but it was mine. And I had the dream apartment and was starting to build what I thought was my dream life. And then 3 years later, I was in a puddle on the floor, anxious, having panic attack, the first probably in my entire life, and realizing I can't do this anymore. And what had led to me getting to the point of I can't do this anymore was a series of many things professionally, just taking on more than I had resources to do, like the demands, or more than my resources to meet them. I'm a social worker by trade, so I started my career doing therapy. And I worked in prison systems. And so there was just more work than I could handle. And then on top of it, what is, I do believe, unique to Black women was not just typical burnout, but also the kind of societal and historical context that Black women work in every day and that are taught as little kids, that as women, we need to struggle. As women, it's totally normal to be exhausted. It's totally normal to do these things in silence, not ask for help. It's totally, you just keep enduring. You deal with people's sexism and racism and both of those things at the same time. And I found that that equally had a part to play in my burnout. And so it was when I healed it for myself, and I'm still healing in a lot of ways from that, even though it's been many years. And when I started to move forward, that I realized that these things are linked and that there needs to be some kind of discussion about how we deal with that, how we face it head on, and how we rewrite the narrative for Black women, that it's not about struggle, but it's about joy.
You mentioned something to me that, caused me to stop in my tracks. Mm-hmm. You mentioned you were on the floor with panic attacks and sobbing. And I just wanted to go back there and just to get a sense from you, what was causing that? Was it more work stress related? And I figure it's a combination, but I just wanted to paint a picture for the audience of kind of like what was happening to Kelley at that time.
It was a combination of things. Like you said, it was definitely work. I mean, I was the only one, depending on the time, I'd been at this job about 3 years. And during that time, there were times where I was one of two, sometimes the only Black female employee at this one of the largest, it was the largest prison in the state that I lived. And so there was that hanging over it. There was just working in prison systems, as anyone can imagine, is a stressful, stressful job. Doing that when you are a Black woman and the majority of the people that you see incarcerated are Black folks or brown folks, and yet the majority of the staff is white, sets up some interesting and not so pleasant dynamics to begin with. And it was all of those things. I had told people that I had started this job because I wanted to make a difference. And I've talked about this and written about it, that there came a point where I realized that I was no longer an agent of change and instead kind of a voyeur of human suffering. I was watching people suffer and not really making an impact. And it was all of those realizations that piled up, and me resisting to help or thinking I could just do it all on my own, or I shouldn't tell people what I'm struggling with. It was all of those things that led to this moment where I basically thought I'd lost my wallet in the prison. And that is a big deal. If you understand prison and security structures, it was a big deal. And so that moment of just pure panic, it turned out it was not left in the prison. It was sitting on a desk somewhere buried under papers.
Right.
But it was that moment of panic that made me, it was a real wake up call. As when I can clearly remember saying, I don't think I can do this and I need to figure out an exit.
I still have a mental image of you, Kelley, when you painted that picture for me, because you're speaking, and as a Black woman, I feel like obviously I've never worked in the prison system, but I've done my own work. And it's kind of a similar thread, right? Where you're the only one. Or
Yes.
sometimes, there's just one or two. And most times, for many of us, you're really just the only one. And so there's a tremendous amount of weight. And I just wanted to talk to you, Kelley, about that and how deep that cuts into the psyche of Black women and the responsibility that we carry on our shoulders when we're the only one. And so I wanted to ask you, because you've been hosting your podcast for a while, you've spoken to many Black women about this, both on and offline. And what is it for them that you're hearing? And I know it's a combination of factors again, but what's the most common threads that you're hearing that are causing this level of burnout among Black women?
I think it is the aspect of loneliness and isolation. I think it's also the fact that we have internalized some historical and cultural myths about what it means to be a Black woman. And that shows up a lot in the workspace as well. The myth of the aggressive Black woman, and the fact that often asking for help is signaled as a sign of weakness. Not asking for help or speaking up for yourself, having boundaries is also seen as a sign of aggression.
Yes.
I see that a lot, that there's just a narrative about, it's really funny. I just recorded an episode about false narratives. And there is a false narrative around Black women in all areas of their life, that we are a certain way, that we are aggressive, that we are inaccessible, that we don't have softness, that we are angry and cannot find joy. And I think that on top of everybody can experience burnout, to be clear, and everyone probably to some degree has experienced that. I talk to Black women all the time that talk about that they learned that adulthood meant exhaustion. They learned that adulthood meant disappointment. And that is a narrative I'm actively trying to rewrite, that I've had to rewrite in myself. And I think when that is what you believe about your life and your potential and your existence, it's a recipe for a bigger type of burnout and a quicker type of burnout. And I think I see that a lot as the common thread.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And for Black women across the diaspora, right, wherever,
Yes.
we are, it's that concept of feeling that, this is my struggle. This is how it's supposed to be, that we have to live with this level, this huge amount of exhaustion and isolation and loneliness, and just feeling this otherness that is
Yes.
like a huge part of your life, or straddling two worlds. It's so funny, Kelley, I remember speaking to friends years ago, and they said, we have to straddle two worlds. We come into workplace as Black women and we can't be ourselves. We can't be authentic. We have to act a certain way, be a certain way, to feel accepted or to be accepted on a basic level. And then when we leave that office or that structure, then we're allowed to be free to be ourselves. And that comes with a huge amount of stress, Kelley. And I know you've been working with organizations, you've been working with individuals. What are you advising workplaces to do in terms of minimizing this and in terms of implementing, solutions to the problem?
Yeah, I think for organizations, really it's about creating environments where everyone can kind of bring their best self to work. Organizations are never probably going to solve some of the societal problems and systems that got us where we are. But what any organization can do at any moment is create the best work environment for its employees. And part of that is acknowledging that people are coming in the door and experiencing narratives placed upon them that are stressful, that there is looking at data and seeing, what does our workforce look like? Who's getting promoted? Who's being seen as a good employee and who's not? And what is that based on, right? Really
Mhm.
creating standardization and creating opportunities for people to feel that they can come into an environment and be accepted. So is there discrimination and bullying or harassment happening? Do you have strong policies that address it? Do you then enforce those strong policies in a way that people feel received? I think the mistake that people make is for as an individual, it's like we need to remember that work is work and that work can have a ton of meaning and that people should do meaningful work. But work should never replace who you are or substitute who you are. And so having a healed relationship with work can help really create an environment where you feel connected, but in the right way and equally able to disconnect.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Just a few episodes ago on the Holistic Wealth podcast, I spoke about holistic wealth, in terms of prevention, burnout recovery. And it's so unbelievable that in our personal lives that I think many of us struggle. You mentioned boundaries earlier. I think many of us struggle. You mentioned the struggles with Black women in the workplace, and enforcing boundaries can be seen as a sign of aggression. And so I just wanted to get your thoughts, Kelley, on how Black women on a personal level, let's talk about work first. How can they enforce these boundaries at work to protect themselves in a way that is not only kind of counterproductive, but in a way that's healthy and will lead to more positive results? And I know that's a hard one because, as you said, right, there's a lot of undoing left to be done. And for organizations, even at that level, it's still very hard because of, like management and who makes up management, right? And as you mentioned, who's getting promoted. So how do you think, and I mean, based on what you've heard from other Black women and on your podcast, how do you think Black women can enforce those boundaries?
Yeah, I think the first way that I teach people to have boundaries or start creating boundaries is to understand, give yourself permission that boundaries does not always mean saying the word no. Absolutely no is a full sentence and it is a boundary. But if you are struggling to set boundaries or you feel like you are in a situation where you do not have, there's power dynamics at play and you don't have the power to just straight up tell your boss, no, I'm not doing that. Instead, what I tell people is learn to set preferences. And so, what that means is when you go into a work environment, you become assertive about saying things like, for example, for myself, I'm a morning person. At first thing in the morning is my best time of work, and the beginning of the week is better than the end. By Friday, I'm running on fumes at 2 o'clock. So for me, it's like I go in, and when I was working in corporate culture, I tried to explain to folks that the best way to reach me, one, is in the morning. The best way to get me is, for example, I'm a person I love IMing because I'm usually doing multiple things, and I was a director in a C-suite. So I was usually in a meeting of some kind. And if you need to reach me, emailing me wasn't going to work because I have 1,001 emails. So being assertive about your preferences sounds small, but I promise you it will cut out a lot of what happens in the tension of I am not a morning person, but this person keeps contacting me in the morning. Now I have to go tell them, don't contact me in the morning. I'm not really great. Right. So that's
Mhm.
one thing. But there are times where we have to just set a boundary that goes beyond a preference and we have to say a thing. And what I tell people is like there's 3 steps to boundary setting. And one is just to be clear about your boundary. You don't have to explain it. You don't have to tell a long story. You just have to say, I've made a decision that I'm not going to be checking my emails after make up a time whenever your time works for you, right?
Uh-huh.
Be clear and don't apologize for your boundaries would be the second thing. The worst thing you can do is say, I'm sorry, but I can't work. People do not interpret that as kindness. And we know from the literature that with women particularly, no one interprets it as kindness and they don't respect it. And then the third piece is when people push back, and there is inevitable pushback when it comes to boundaries, you have to remain firm and be clear about that despite it. Remember that setting boundaries can be hard in the beginning, but when you contextualize it with, this is what helps me be the best performer, that I want to continue to be the best at what I do. And because of that, I need to be able to shut off, or I need to be able to switch tasks, or I can't take this initiative on this quarter, contact me next quarter so I can give it my full attention, right? We want to contextualize it in connecting to our performance and our work and how we want to be present, and then remain firm despite it. Because even though people are going to come with their microaggression, but despite that, you have to remain firm, because if you give in, it doesn't help either. It doesn't make it better. And oftentimes it makes it worse.
Absolutely. And I love the fact that you brought up setting firm boundaries because, there are instances, and it happens all the time, where, yeah, you're talking about your preferences proactively, but then you're asked to violate your values. Let's talk about a boundary, like in that case, where you're explicitly asked to do something in a workplace setting that's unethical, and it violates your values, like your core values. Like, this is unethical. The boss is asking you to do it because they want to impress their higher ups and they don't want to say no, and they don't want to set the boundary. Honestly, like I feel like the everyday of boundary setting is almost a bigger and more serious for a lot of women than, like, let's say, preferences, like in being asked to carry out a job or a task that violates a clear ethical boundary. So I'm just wondering, what would you advise? I mean, you mentioned staying firm, but what would you advise in a situation like that?
Staying firm for sure, and knowing your resources, knowing what your policies are, knowing what's available to you. What I tell people is all of us have probably been in this situation, but we hope that there's signs before it gets here. My goal is like to get you before that point, because then you realize this maybe is not the workplace culture for you.
Yeah.
But if you end up in that situation, firm, document. The first thing you do is you remain firm, you document what occurred, and you pursue your options potentially through HR. Because at that situation, to be real and transparent, you're opened up for retaliation, which more than not is going to happen if you say no to something that your boss wants you to do. And so you need to protect yourself. And that's the way you do that. And if you feel like, oh, that could be me, right? If you're hearing this conversation, you're saying, that hasn't happened yet, but I could see easily a situation where that could occur with my boss, then I would encourage people to realign with their values, as you talked about, what is important to you, and begin the work now of pivoting your role, pivoting your position. Because if you can pivot or figure out another alternative to this employment and start doing it now, because it always takes time and it's not perfect, do it now. Don't wait till you get to that situation and then say, I have to tell my boss that's absolutely illegal or unethical and I'm not doing it. So that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen it multiple times. That's why I had to ask the question multiple times. And, Kelley, even though, you're in the US, I'm in Canada, let's just say that the issues that pop up in terms of racism in the United States are firmly here as well. Because like I speak to people all the time, and they think, oh, Canada's different. It's so much more inclusive than the United States. And at least you don't have men getting shot down in the streets. But I'm telling you, yes, we don't, so maybe we don't have that. But I find it's just as bad in Canada as in the United States. So
for sure.
And so I wanted to ask you about financial burnout, because we're on the Holistic Wealth podcast and I speak about finances quite a bit. And for Black women and Black men, like Black people just in general, I find that finances can be a huge source of stress. And there's so many reasons for that, right? There's the pay gap. Black women earn a fraction of what white women earn, and white males And of course, systemic racism. You mentioned the issue of lack of promotions. Even with entrepreneurs, it's the same thing with getting a business loan. It's rampant in terms of the financial barriers that can also lead to financial burnout. And I just wanted to ask you about what you have seen in terms of your interactions too with Black women and Black males. Like, how are they, talking about burnout from a financial perspective, especially given the high inflation rates and the current economic climate? Have you been having a lot of conversations around that?
I think for me, what I see a lot of, and I'm by no means a financial expert, is that I see a lot of it being tied into this theme of struggle, that a lot of us have, everyone says money is a psychological construct. Like, people's ability to achieve wealth is a lot related to mindset. And that's not negating everything you just said about the inflation rates, about our economy, about the distribution of wealth across people of different races and genders. But what I do see a lot of is this belief going in again of struggle, that money is a struggle. There's a lot of scarcity mindset that, get it now, spend it now, because you're not going to get any more. And so when that is in the psychology, if that's in your life, right, it undermines your ability to apply tips and tools. People provide a lot of tools and they are good, no criticisms for a lot of them. They make a lot of sense. But if you believe that it's your lot in life, your inheritance to struggle with the concept of money, which so many people do believe in the Black community, then telling someone, oh, you need to do an investment schedule is not going to happen, because they're not going to invest because they believe that money is something that will go.
Yeah.
It's tied to a lot of trauma. And historically, Black communities that have thrived, particularly in the United States and honestly across the globe, in Africa, you look at civilizations that are thriving financially, they have been wiped out. They've been wiped out. They've been targeted. And so it leaves this legacy of people having this unhealthy relationship with money. And part of my journey to coming out of struggle was acknowledging that even in myself. And I certainly didn't have it as bad as others, but I did have a lot of blocks that were culturally rooted around money itself.
Absolutely. And I train people in recovering from money trauma. And it's an area that I'm doing a lot of work in. And you're absolutely right. Like, transforming our relationship with money is one of the key things that, we have to do. And it's so funny, you brought up the scarcity mentality and money blocks and money mindset, and all of that I find across the diaspora is rooted, right, in our struggle, and rooted in what was taken away, and rooted in what was ingrained in us as the belief as that, you don't deserve it, or that no matter how hard you work for it, you won't get it. Or if you get it, it's going to go. So there's so much work around that. And it's part of the work that I've been trying to do to reframe our mindsets and to coach others in money trauma. But Kelley, you've been doing important work, and I really admire the work that you've been doing around Black women and around burnout. And so if you had any last parting words for women who are struggling with this in their daily lives. I mean, we spoke about boundaries already. We covered that part. Any other strategies that women can implement? This is still a stressful time coming out of COVID. I've heard many Black women talk about even having long COVID and trying to work and trying to do everything and have kids. And so what would you advise in terms of like just strategies in general for burnout?
Yeah, I think part of it is around a couple of things. Being really clear on what matters to you. Again, we have to heal our relationships with concepts and systems. And so part of the way we do that is just knowing what matters, what our values are, what makes us tick, and what brings us satisfaction and joy. And the reason why I say it starts with that, even though people sometimes roll their eyes and are like, okay, it starts with that because everything flows through that. For example, if your values are tied up in being connected or being a part of a community, then you need to reframe what success looks like. And success stops being about your to-do list, which is probably never going to get done, and there'll always be something to add to it. And it becomes about, did I connect with someone today? Did I feel like I contributed to my community? that becomes a successful day. That becomes a successful relationship. If parenting and connection is important to you, did I connect with my child in some way? Did we just pass each other today and didn't even say hello? So I say people to start there, to be clear about what matters to them, but also understand this fundamental truth that people bristle at, but I promise you is accurate. That when you center cultivating joy in your life, everything follows after. And joy isn't about being happy all the time. Joy is a practice and a discipline about finding ways to bring some level of peace and joy into your life every day, meaning that it could be as simple as in my work quarter, for some time, I was working at a dining room table when we first started COVID. I would keep my favorite hand lotion nearby. That was the smallest act of joy in a very joyless situation in many ways, as you can imagine during that time, that I could find, but that I created it. And then I created a bunch of small moments that added up to a joyful day, then maybe a joyful month. And when things got bad again, I went back to my reserve. Like, okay, I've had a tough conversation. Where's that lotion? Let me smell that thing for a minute and give me 5 seconds. And I have people on my podcast, every single guest, you'll see the same clarity and the same theme. Once they shifted out of struggle and into centering joy, they got the job of their dreams. They got the relationships they were looking for. They had less money issues because out of that changed the way they approached every decision they made. And so that's what I would leave folks with.
Absolutely. And that's so centered in the holistic wealth framework too, Kelley, as you're talking. It's unbelievable that, when I say holistic wealth is intentional by design, it's being very intentional about your day. And it's being very intentional about those small decisions that you make. And I also always talk about filling up your holistic wealth bank account with these additions that will, as you said, center your life in joy rather than the depletions that leave you feeling bankrupt and leave you feeling empty. And they add up, each day that you go along and you do this, it adds up. So Kelley, before we go, and I've really enjoyed this conversation, can you tell our guests where they can look you up, where they can find you, your website and social media?
Absolutely. So it is Black Girl Burnout. The website's blackgirlburnout.com. Same for Instagram and TikTok. And then for Twitter, it's Black Girl, so BLK, Girl Burnout. You can find me there. And of course, the podcast is across all major streaming platforms. It airs 3 times a week, where we help you opt out of the struggle and opt into your true inheritance, which is one of joy and community.
Absolutely. Again, Kelley, this was amazing. Lots of small nuggets of wisdom there that people can implement in their daily lives from this moment on. So thank you so much for being here.
Yes, thank you for having me. This is wonderful.
The Holistic Wealth Podcast with Keisha Blair is brought to you by... Have you joined the Institute on Holistic Wealth? If you haven't already, what are you waiting for? Choose your membership plan at the Institute on Holistic Wealth/memberships to join. As a member, you'll get access to free worksheets, advice, coaching, and an intentional design workshop. As you start to live a more holistically wealthy lifestyle, you'll want to stay for a very long time. So go to Institute on Holistic Wealth/memberships to join. If you haven't read the book yet, pick up a copy of the award-winning best-selling Holistic Wealth 36 Life Lessons to help you recover from disruption, find your life purpose, and achieve financial freedom.